Much.
Thank you.
Well, to continue this theme, cybersecurity, of course, will be one of the issues President Obama will discuss with the Chinese president when the two leaders meet next week. And our next guest says, well, it's time for the president to get tough. Joining us now, Governor Tom Ridge, former Homeland Security Secretary and co-founder of the Ridge-Schmidt Cyber. Governor, thank you so much for joining us. It feels like, I mean, it's an overused expression, but it's Groundhog Day. We keep saying the same things. We keep pointing the fingers at China or Iran, whoever. At what point do we actually draw a line in the sand and say enough is enough?
Well, I suspect, actually, that we've already drawn the line in the sand, but the rhetorical enough is obviously very ineffective.
Yeah.
And while we look to government to try to resolve the problems with Iran and China, and frankly, it doesn't make too much difference as to where the hackers are located, at the end of the day, there's a joint responsibility. And part of that responsibility rests with the CEOs and the boards of directors of the companies that have been hacked into. It just seems to me that if the FBI has to knock on your door and tell you that there has been a major incursion or two, then perhaps you weren't doing your job. It's like Homeland Security. Everybody's got a role to play. And this whole notion that we shouldn't be surprised anymore. It's an ongoing effort, day to day. You should act as if they've already inside your system, your network, and do everything you can to create a defense in depth or security in depth to identify it and deal with it. But right now, we're still a little bit too passive about these things.
Well, we are. Now we hear news from this Washington Post report that, they've had a good look at a lot of the weapon systems. They've also, I'm sure, had a good look at some of the critical infrastructure of this country. I mean, literally, the horse is already bolted. How can we why can't we come up with the technology to stop it in its tracks?
Well, frankly, I think, first of all, there's sufficient public evidence to suggest that many of the incursions could have been avoided with just off-the-shelf technology. It's almost it's like an invisible enemy. We're really good about dealing with physical attacks, but all of a sudden this whole virtual world is kind of vague and it's invisible, and we just kind of defer that. And I think, frankly, we need, and here's where the private sector has a role to play. Look, the president's going to have the conversation, and what the military does and what our intelligence agencies do and everybody else does, we'll leave it up to them. That's below the radar. I'm quite confident they'll do with something in response, but there's a joint responsibility within the corporate community to do far more than they've ever done before. And they need to build a culture of resiliency. They have to build a defense in depth, security in depth. What are the crown jewels? Do you have access controls? Do you have encryption dealing with your crown jewels? Do you have antivirus and spam software? And do you have patch management? You just go down the long list of things, and quite candidly, I don't think until recent days there have been too much emphasis on this in the corporate boardrooms and up to the CEO level. And it's about time there became some much greater emphasis. There's a role to be played there.
Is it a cost issue, Governor, with these companies? Are they just cutting costs? They don't want to have to invest the time and money into these systems?
Well, Ashley, I think that's a good question, and my answer to that is simply you have stakeholders. Whether you're a public company or a private company, you have stakeholders to whom you are responsible. Your employees, your customers, your communities, your board of directors, and frankly, if you're a publicly traded company, to your shareholders. And if you were the CEO, could you look in the mirror and say, I've done everything I can. I have been personally involved in ensuring that we are doing everything we can with regard to best practices and tactics to minimize the risk. And sadly, based on some experience we've had, the answer is that not a lot of CEOs view it as being part of their overall responsibility. And I mean in a more granular, specific way, looking at it from their eyes rather than just deferring it to the chief information officer or the chief technology officer. It's got to get to the top. It's about profitability. It's about brand. It's about your economic security as well as national security. There's a joint responsibility between government and the private sector. And right now, I'm not confident that the private sector is doing everything they can to take care of their share of the responsibility.
Hopefully they'll get the message soon here. Thank you so much, Governor Tom Ridge with Ridge-Schmidt Cyber. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good talking with you, Ashley. Thank you.
He's right, though, man. You got to take this into your own hands for now.
I mean, it just seems like these hackers can walk into any company's website. They can get all the information they need and get out without the companies even knowing.
Right. I mean, and if you're a bank, God, that should be the only thing you think about. All right, well, still to come as